And today I wanted to talk just for a few minutes about the topic of a spouse who is emotionally absent, or where there is emotional disconnection or withdrawal. So first, just some thoughts about what it means to be emotionally absent. I think it looks a lot of times like, when people use the analogy of a conversation being bouncing the ball to each other. So an emotionally absent conversation looks like you bounce the ball to your spouse and they either slam it back, smack it back. I think of playing ping pong with my brothers growing up, and it never really was about the fun of the game. It was about slamming the ball back. It's kind of that idea. There's no room for you to even bounce it back to them after that. So they either slam it back, you bounce the ball to them, they either slam it back or they take their ball and go home. There's no response. There's nothing that looks like an interaction. It was like you lodged something their direction and it went to an abyss somewhere. It can also look like where any and every interaction or response is just logistical in nature, not a thoughtful exchange of ideas. It's just about naming facts or naming logistical things, or very tangential stuff that doesn't require a thoughtful interaction. There's not a give or take, so to speak, or any kind of an emotional judgment call about what was said or not said. So the interactions tend to be really superficial, statements of fact. I say that tongue-in-cheek. Statements of fact without any room to question or to gain further understanding. It's just a statement of fact. It's just a logistical, shallow, often response that doesn't leave any room for there to be an interaction. It's just fact. There's also very much a sense that you are not seen or heard. Like you say something and the words might be heard, but any meaning you've attached to it or any thought you have engaged with it is just falling flat. It's not going anywhere. There's no emotional connection. There's nothing beyond the logistics of the words. So there's a difference between being emotionally expressive and emotionally connected. So, an emotionally absent life that I would call a facade might look full of emotion. It might be, full of anger and angry outbursts and passion and excitement and that kind of thing. But it's all part of the facade, not a real, authentic emotion. And so there is no emotion connectivity in that space. It's just part of the show, so to speak. So someone can be very emotionally expressive without emotionally connecting. When you're living a facade, that implies that there's most of who you really are, most of who your spouse really is it's a show. It's a pretense. It's in hiding. Who he really is in hiding. And that in and of itself is a wall. The only way you can connect to somebody requires being exposed to who they really are and being seen and known for who you really are. There's no room for reciprocity of an expression of ideas or thoughts or personality, and there's no capacity to allow differences, someone to think differently than you, for example, or your spouse. They don't make room for anyone to think differently than them. There's no room to allow those differences while still intermingling the logistics of life. So there's no capacity to live alongside someone who is just living a facade without feeling disconnected. Like the facade always equals an emotionally shallow relationship. Because a facade is a sham, a lie, there's little to no depth to which people can connect emotionally. Not because, like if you're a deep person, not because you don't have the capacity to connect, but because they are not offering you anything you can truly connect to. A facade is a lie. It's the wind. You cannot connect to that. You cannot connect to a lie. So while you might be deceived into believing something about that person, they are only connected to the facade that they are upholding, not to you, the person they are misleading. That, again, translates to an emotionally absent relationship. So at some point you begin to feel it. And you will also probably become aware that emotional withdrawal has become the weapon of choice in your relationship. It didn't work for them at the moment to maintain the connection, because again, it's not the connection they're driven by, it is the power and control, managing the narrative. And so if they can manage you and manage the narrative by actually withdrawing emotionally from you to get you to shut up and leave them alone, for example, or to punish you for whatever reason. You did something they didn't agree with or didn't appreciate or felt disrespected by or whatever, they will use that as a weapon to get you to sit down, to shut up, to leave them alone, give them what they want, or to punish you again, particularly if you have not followed their script of the narrative. So you'll begin to feel that over time. Truth and time walk hand in hand. There comes a time where you get to see people, you get to recognize people for who they really are, even when they are trying to manage a really strong narrative. I would also add that being emotionally present requires introspective maturity. To be emotionally present, one has to know and accept himself or herself with an orientation toward continually growing and maturing and seeking truth and pursuing it. We're not done until we're dead. And so the person who is not growing or maturing or seeking truth is, one, already dying, and two, is bringing death to their relationships. It takes a great deal of work and effort to have to do differently. And then being emotionally present requires being able to show up in the world being authentic. Not living a facade, meaning not living our life under some sense of hiding, but living our life and letting it be the testimony of who we are, rather than trying to control the narrative that we hide behind. I think this is the human journey. This is the whole crux of the human journey, is to grow and to mature and to come out of hiding. You know, if you think about it, we all start life completely, totally codependent little narcissistic monsters. And somewhere along the way, life has a compelling way of bringing us to a point where we either dive in to hide deeper, or we have to come out of hiding to grow and mature and connect. So we have to be able to show up authentically, to know ourselves and to show up, bring that to the table, so that we have the capacity to interrelate with other people, to connect emotionally to other people. Healthy looks like doing that with authenticity, with humility, with reciprocity, with mutuality, with freedom, and all of those elements require a lot of courage, which looks like stepping into fear to come out of hiding. The point is that having an emotionally absent spouse leaves you to reckon with what you thought the relationship was based upon, to work to find your own authentic footing, who you are and how you want to show up in the world, and to thoughtfully consider, one, either continuing to invite your spouse to do the work, and it is work, to interact more authentically, to expose his or her real self to you, or two, to continue living with them in an emotionally shallow relationship and to find your way doing that well, regardless of whether or not they're offering you anything of depth. Or 3, to set them free to live in their own facade without you. In any event, you will have to make room for grief, which is a whole nother topic of its own. The point being that none of this looks the way that it's supposed to or what's written on your heart to, and yet there's lots of room to figure out how to navigate it with strength and steadfastness and wisdom, regardless of what your spouse is choosing to do. So if you would like to unpack this more specifically in your own relationship, or to practice ways to be personally more authentic and emotionally deep, we would love to help.